Hello.
Hello. How are you
Hello.
doing?
Now, for the benefit of you who perhaps aren't patrons and who don't otherwise know me, just a couple of days I was tested positive with COVID. I've got a streaming head cold and whatnot, and Brother Stanislaus likewise is not well. He has lost his voice. So he's not joining us. And so, for the sake at least of the viewers who have been clamoring for an episode, and for the sake of Bishop Kelly, so that he's not full screen by himself, I am speaking to you through the medium of an avatar. But I'm not feeling pretty enough, I'm afraid, to be on screen myself.
Oh dear.
But there's been so much gone on since the fortnight that we've been off air. That there's much to comment on, and I know that many of our viewers are desperate to hear what pearls of wisdom we might have to offer, considering all that's been going on. As usual, folks, please in the comments say hi, tell us where you're watching from. It's always nice and interesting to know who's watching and where you are in the world. So please do that. Greetings to Trevor there in Washington State. Greetings to the wonderful Anne in Ireland. Greetings to Janet in South Africa. Excellent. It's lovely to see you. Everyone else, please don't be shy. Please say hi. So, I'm just going to put that in the comments. There we go. So, I suppose first off would have to be the recent developments. Read Traditiones Custodes, the infamous motu proprio, essentially seeking to wipe out the Latin Mass. I'm sorry, that is exactly its stated purpose, which, of course, has been made clearer by subsequent responsum and dubia made by Archbishop Roche of the Vatican. Hi, Peggy. Good to see you. East Tennessee. Wonderful. Hi, Richard from Wisconsin. That's great. Hi, Shirley from Saltdean in the UK. And to Barbara. Bless you. Thank you, Barbara. I hope so soon. Oh, and greetings to Mary. Hi, Mary in Escanaba. There we go. Good to see you. So, there's been, of course, further development since Archbishop Roche's comments, and that is the disappearance of various traditional Latin masses, and even worse, the cancellation of confirmations administered in the traditional rite. Now, Cardinal Supich, where you are, Bishop Kelly, has been particularly strident in enforcing the motu proprio. As I understand it, in Illinois now, there is one diocesan priest left to offer a TLM,
Well,
aside from
I don't know.
Cantius.
Well, it would be. I don't know in Illinois, but certainly in the Archdiocese of Chicago. I hadn't heard that, and I don't know who that would be. I know there were several diocesan parishes that were offering the TLM prior to this. So I don't know if he's quashed all but one, and I wonder who that is and why he was spared. I am aware of what do you call it? The Saint Stanislaus father. I think it's Father Anthony Buss,
Yeah.
who had applied to say the Novus Ordo ad Orientem or versus Dominum, and he was denied. I think that became fairly public. I know of several other parishes, including the Holy Cross Benedictine Monastery, who only have an east-facing altar. So I don't know if they will be affected or not. I don't see how he has the power to do that, because even in the rubrics for the new mass and in the German, it presupposes that the priest is facing east. It repeatedly says, and turning towards the people, he says, turning to the altar, he continues. So I don't know where he gets the power to ban that. Even the Holy Father has been spotted using an altar firmly attached to a wall. So I don't know if, when the dust settles, some of this will be tweaked in order to conform with universal law allowances and practice, or he'll be allowed to continue being an exception in this little corner of Christendom. It is very depressing. I know a lot of traditional Catholics that feel down and depressed about this. They feel as if they're being persecuted, and they are. Yet again, a lot of because of the growth of the traditional Latin Mass among young people, they don't remember the 80s and the battles that went on then. For those of us who are a bit older, this seems like familiar territory.
Well, it is a complete, it's a complete return to the 70s.
It is. I listened to Archbishop Roche's interview or podcast or whatever it was. I mean, the language he was using was right out of it. That this is not. It had hoped, that those people who find it difficult to. It was extremely patronizing. His reasoning behind this was ill-informed, patronizing, full of errors and misread of liturgical history. I mean, it was amateur. I think that the only possible gravitas it has was his English accent, but if you could listen beyond that, it was terrible, and quite embarrassing, actually, that a man should climb so high in the church and be given such responsibility and power over universal liturgy that seems to have no read on liturgical history or development throughout 2,000 years. It's shameful.
Yeah. I mean, it's a return again, isn't it, to all that false liturgical archaeology that was so prevalent in the 50s and 60s, and which has been proved by scholars time and time again to have been completely faulty, and without a shred of evidence. Particularly, for example, the versus populum facing the people at the altar. There is no evidence from antiquity that was ever a practice of the church, or certainly not by the time of the church's developed liturgies. Certainly, it's always been ad orientem. We only have to look to, as usual, to the Orthodox East to see what the perennial tradition has always been, because, of course, they still observe it themselves. The Eastern Orthodox have always celebrated ad orientem, even though, as with the classical altars, you can still see in Rome from antiquity, their altars are freestanding. Even so, they face and celebrate ad orientem. I mean, Father Bos, I think the situation there was that he was already celebrating ad orientem and wanted to check that he could continue to do so, and then was told no, that he should face the people. And there is another diocese somewhere in America where the bishop has issued a letter requiring all masses in his diocese to be offered facing the people. And this together, the two I think sort of greatest fallacies of the liturgical so-called reform of Vatican II are versus populum and concelebration. These are the two big fallacies to come from the liturgical movement of Vatican II. As I've just said, there was no practice of versus populum masses in the early church. And secondly, there is no evidence of concelebration. Now, an interesting article, a very scholarly article, was posted on the New Liturgical Movement, written by one Bishop Athanasius Schneider, who went into very in depth the matter of concelebration and proved pretty conclusively that it was never a thing in the Latin Rite, and even actually that a common misconception is that concelebration is practiced by the Eastern Orthodox. Well, in fact, it isn't. That is to say that the assumption is that when for example, a patriarch is celebrating the Divine Liturgy, he is surrounded by other bishops in Eucharistic vestments and other senior priests and clergy in their Eucharistic vestments. Here, I think it's important to understand that in the East, there is no sense of choir dress in quite the same way that it has been developed in the West. So when the clergy surround the metropolitan or surround the patriarch, it is customary for them to wear the vestments of their order. So the subdeacons, the deacons, the priests, the archimandrites, the bishops, the core bishops, etc., will all wear the vestments pertaining to their order. And yes, certain of them, the senior ones, will stand around the altar with the patriarch while he offers the Divine Liturgy. But if you ever watch a patriarchal or metropolitical Divine Liturgy, you will notice that at the consecration of the elements, for example, or indeed at the epiclesis in their rite, there is a significant hand gesture that they do not make, but that modernists, contemporary modernists in the Latin Rite do make, which is, in the Eastern Rite, they do not stick out their hand and point toward the Eucharistic species and mutter the words of consecration along with the patriarch or the metropolitan who is offering the Mass. They don't do that because they are not actually concelebrating. They are there sharing in the wholeness of the sacred ministry that is being offered by the high priest, in this case, the vicar of Christ, who is the patriarch, the metropolitan, the archbishop, or whichever senior priest is offering the Mass. And they stand there, as it were, as extensions of the subdiaconate, the diaconate, the priesthood, and the episcopate of the patriarch, the metropolitan, the major archbishop, who is offering the liturgy. Bishop Schneider, in his excellent article on concelebration, points this out, that the same can be seen, evidenced from the old papal liturgies. So the old papal mass that used to be celebrated in St. Peter's, Rome, right up until the end of John the 23rd's pontificate, the Pope would be offering the Mass, but he would be surrounded by cardinal deacons, cardinal priests, and again supported by other assistant sacred ministers in roles of some deacon and acolyte and so on and so forth. And likewise, nobody there put out their hand or put out their arm and attempted to mutter the words of consecration along with the Pope, because they were not concelebrating. They were there in their ranks of order, manifesting, demonstrating their solidarity in communion with the Pope, who, possessing the fullness of the priesthood, was offering the Mass. So in other words, and likewise, if we think about the Chrism Mass, the old Chrism Mass, when the bishop consecrates the holy oils, he is assisted by priests, deacons, and subdeacons. I think the number is 7 of each, I think, are supposed to assist. And they do so, again, in Eucharistic vestments, so according to their rank in holy orders, but they do not concelebrate. They are there, again, manifesting solidarity and communion with their various grades of order, which are together, brought together and represented wholly and manifested and enacted through the bishop of the diocese, who is consecrating the oils and offering the Mass. So this whole notion that we have that has developed since Vatican II of priests concelebrating a Eucharist is an absolute fallacy. It's totally made up. It has no basis in antiquity whatsoever. And there is a criminal element to this fallacy, because canon law was changed to say that priests who had received Mass stipends could fulfill those Mass stipends by concelebrating the Eucharist with another priest. So in other words, Father so-and-so is the main celebrant, and Father Joe and Father Smith, who are concelebrating with him either side, are claiming to fulfill their Mass stipend, meaning the obligation that they've promised someone to offer a Mass, and they've received a donation for that. The false claim is made that they are fulfilling that obligation by concelebrating in that Mass. But the truth of the matter is, of course, they are not, because only one of the priests can be offering the Mass, not 3. The other 2 may assist, and for sure they may even fulfill the role of deacon or MC or whatever, and put on and off the lid of the ciborium or the pall from the chalice. But no matter, sticking their hands out and saying words does not confect the Eucharist. Simple sacramental theology. It's the celebrant taking the host into his hands and through exsufflation, breathing the words of consecration on it, and then, of course, into the chalice, that affects and confects the Eucharist. Anybody standing around waving their arms, muttering words, but not touching the elements at that moment of consecration are not consecrating those elements. And therefore, therefore they who claim to be fulfilling a stipend are in fact not. Technically, they aren't. Sorry, that was a bit of a long rant.
No, it's true though, because it's it's seldom mentioned about the problem of concelebration, and now it's expected in modern Roman circles. I mean, and you look at those awful mass rally papal masses, where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of priests and bishops and then thousands of lay people, and then everyone has to receive Holy Communion. And I mean, it's just an absolute mockery. And I mean, it makes perfect sense that concelebration is, well, it's more than an abuse. But I mean, you even take the often maligned but mentioned Mrs. Murphy at the back of the church. She knows there's something fishy because she knows from her catechism that there's one priest, one victim. And then when she
Exactly.
sees 54 priests and hanging around, saying mass by remote control, where does it end? Can Father be sitting in his bed in the rectory with a stole around his neck, watching the live feed from the church below, and stick
Well,
out his paw
I mean,
and collect the stipend?
literally this week, there's been a debate. A supposed eminent Church of England theologian has suggested that that those who have their own bread and wine watching a Eucharist online, he claims that when the priest offering that Eucharist speaks the words of consecration, that those who are sitting near the screen with their bread and their wine, those elements are then consecrated. I kid you not. Seriously, I kid you not.
Out of charity, I will refrain from commenting further on that.
But there seems to me here to be common in the sort of the theology post Vatican II, and it goes across all the sects, not just the contemporary Novus Ordo church. But there seems to be a disconnect. They seem to have forgotten that our faith is an incarnational faith. Therefore, it matters whether or not the priest intending to confect the Eucharist is actually holding and touching and speaking over the bread and the wine to confect the body and blood, soul and divinity of Jesus. Our faith is incarnational.
Exactly. And, Christ was there at the crucifixion, actually, really there. He
Exactly.
wasn't by remote control. He wasn't beamed in. And then you fall into Gnosticism and some of these modern sects that said, well, it was an angel that came down and took his place because, of course, the Son of God couldn't suffer and die. And you get into all that sort of substitutional thing. And so, and it's sort of reeks of that a little bit. And, a lot of pundits had said during the COVID lockdown, when everyone was doing Zoom church and nobody could actually physically go to a building, and a number of commentators said, we'll find it very hard to recover from this. We've opened a door here that's going to be hard to shut. And as you just said, I mean, these are the natural consequences of it. If you can attend church by Zoom, then you can confect the Eucharist, such as it is in those circles, by Zoom. If you follow that logic, but if you follow the incarnational faith of Christianity, then it's impossible. So it has never been the case that you fulfill your obligation by watching Mass on television. Now, circumstances may dictate that it's the best you can get, and you can, of course, make a spiritual communion, but it's not the same. And they've had in America, they have this. I find it an awful phrase, but they have Mass for shut-ins. Which means people who cannot, they're sick, they're ill or disabled, and they cannot physically make it to church. So they broadcast it locally from the church. But I mean, most people, until fairly recently, would be aware that it gives them an opportunity to observe the liturgy, the worship, to to hear the word of God, to hear the sermon, to pray along with. But none of them were under the impression that this fulfills their obligation. And of course, they're exempt from it because of illness anyway. So it was just a way of being connected. It wasn't a substitution, or it wasn't, the same thing. Nobody ever thought that. But I guess the goalposts have shifted yet again. I mean, there was this thing maybe 20, 30 years ago about hearing confessions over the telephone. It's that sort of mentality, and you're always going to get that. I mean, you're always going to. Father Trendy's always going to want to appeal and have the latest gadget. He swapped his BlackBerry for the latest iPhone, and he's really with it. That all these, they just keep pushing the boundaries with it. But I mean, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever if you sit down and think of it for 5 minutes. And that's the problem. People don't think. They run with every new shiny object and think this is the solution. No, the solution is to get back to basics. The solution is to preach the message preached by Christ and to live within the tradition of the church. That's the solution. It's worked for 2,000 years. When we set it aside, things have collapsed.
Well, that's surely self-evident to anyone.
Yeah, well, you would think, but it's not.
Yeah, I know.
It's not,
people don't look at the statistics. They don't look at, and yet, well, again, I think people must realize to a point, but they don't take in perhaps the full seriousness of the situation. I mean, anybody who goes to mass can surely see that there are fewer people today than there were in years past. And likewise, anyone who tries to go to confession, and if there is an opportunity for confessions to be heard, anyone can see that the queue is nothing like it was in times past. But what goes with that, sadly, is a lack of impetus or realization on their own part that this is the state and the situation of the church today, and you can do something about it. We always lament the fact that there were only half dozen for confession, there were only half dozen for mass, there was this church is closing and this church is gone and blah blah blah. But people have to wake up out of I think a sense of lethargy and apathy about practicing their faith, and realize that we can no longer expect the church around the corner always to be open, or always to have mass, or always to have a priest, or always to be there. And the impetus of and again, this is one of the big criticisms of the current Pope and his admonitions all the time not to proselytize and not to evangelize, and yet that's what as Christians we're all called to do. And we don't have to be a commissioned catechist, we don't have to be a commissioned lector, we don't have to be a sacred minister or religious sister to manifest and teach the gospel and preach the gospel to others.
Yeah, we don't. We do need a stirring up. I think what the church has become comfortable doing is appealing to the masses. They don't encourage confession because it's difficult. Even weekly attendance. Well, watch it on the computer at home. Because making an effort's difficult. If they pander to this less than lukewarm Catholicism, they have the false hope that the coins will still drop in the basket.
I think it's even worse than that. I think it's even worse than that. I think they don't actually believe anymore. I don't think they believe. And I don't think they believe confession is necessary anymore.
No, you know, can't I just say sorry to God, and Father will say, oh yes, of course. You know, it's a whole watering down of the faith, and you do that effectively by attacking the heart of the faith, the summit of the faith, which is the Holy Mass, and they've done that quite
Yeah.
effectively. I mean, just look, you know, you mentioned about lines for confession, but you look at the whole practice now of people, and it's linked, of course, because it's to do with being in a state of grace, about people going to Holy Communion. Now, when I was young, and this is in the 80s, at a novice order parish, about maybe less than half of the congregation would go forward to Holy Communion.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that was seen as
That's
normal.
normal. Yeah, that was usual.
Now, if you don't, you're stared at.
Mm.
And what's worse, the ushers will force you row by row. Everyone has to go. Bring your Starbucks up. You know, could you mind taking the tune and come out for a minute? You know, and communion in the hand is another insidious thing, because
Yeah.
it tells you that it's, well, if you just plunk it down in your hand there by somebody wearing you know, a multicolored tie or a flowery blouse, there's nothing special about it. There's no priest, there's no victim, there's no sacrifice, there's no feeding, as the promise of Peter, as the share in that Petrine command of do you love me? Yes, you know, Lord, you know, feed my sheep. There's none of that. All that sense is stripped away. It's a meal. It's a ritual meal, and you get a little token, and everyone comes up and gets a little token, and goes and sits down. In fact, you know, I talked about half the congregation going to Holy Communion. At the end of Holy Communion, now half the congregation are in the car park. You know, people don't believe, and it's not the people's fault, because they've been given nothing but straw from the church, and deliberately so, but in the praxis of the Holy Mass.
Yeah.
You know, where it's, you know, whether it's the, you know, the Father Mike show that starts at 10 o'clock, goes for 45 minutes. And you know, everyone comes up, gets their token, and heads to the car park. And I mean, there's only so much. There's only so many times you can go to that before the penny drops and goes, well, this is pointless. Why even bother? And then, you know, the churches are empty. You know, it's and either they see it and they're happy with it, or they don't see it. But and it's ridiculous. And I mean, Archbishop Roach more or less just confessed that the reason that this voto proprio was promulgated by the present Holy Father is that rather than pastorally helping those who found change difficult, it was promoting a growth in the traditional Mass, and that has to be stamped out, because our Mass is dying, the traditional Mass is growing. We would have to admit we got the whole thing wrong, or indeed got it right.
Well, you know, I mean, there was a very interesting article. This was posted on the oldroman.com, so don't forget, folks, to check that every day. We post there a wide variety of articles from various outlets across the world, commenting on matters of Catholic interest. And there was an excellent article this week entitled "Disobey and You'll Get Your Way." For 50 years, liberal disobedience and disregard for liturgical norms most often resulted not only in no punishment, but in having disobedience enshrined in law. And communion in the hand is given as an example, but another one would be female servers, extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. All these things were, you know, that are commonplace today, were tolerated abuses, and you know, manifest disobedience. So a suggestion, of course, is that traditionalists, by response or in response to the motu proprio and the responsum ad dubia, should follow the like and themselves just ignore and disobey.
Yeah, it does seem like that, and that you have Father Buss, whose only crime was to say a modern mass facing the Lord, was sent to a re-education camp or something to rethink his priestly vocation, where you have the likes of the scandal-ridden Father Flager, who puts on a Rocky Horror Picture Show for Christmas Eve Mass, and he's lauded as an asset to the archdiocese. It's absolutely disgusting the way it's done boldly. It's done boldly by these hierarchs. They don't try to hide it.
Not forgetting that Father Flager was, was of misdemeanor
by
several people, was supposedly investigated and then reinstated. Whereas, why is it always that traditionalist clergy who are accused are never reinstated, even if they're cleared?
Yes, you think of Father Phillips from St. John Kench's, who was exonerated, found there was no case to answer, yet Supage pulled his faculties for the archdiocese and refused to let him minister.
And this is the same archdiocese. So Father Flager and Father Phillips both working for the same archbishop. Both incidents occurred during the same archbishop's tenure. But one who is, a noted traditionalist, is, treated badly, whereas another who is a notorious heretic, frankly, he is. He has disavowed various core dogmas of Catholic doctrine. He's welcomed back and permitted to continue as if nothing happened.
Yes, and you have, as I mentioned several times, your Father Anthony Buss, whose only crime was to follow the Second Vatican Council, saying a vernacular mass in the new rite ad orientem, which was envisaged when the new mass was composed.
And there you see is the irony, isn't it? Because, and this is, going back.
He spent a way to reevaluate his priesthood. Surely Flager should be flung out and spend the rest of his life in a monastery reevaluating his relationship with the church.
But this is it. And there was another article this week, and there's been a few recently, cardinals and bishops who basically have suggested, and Archbishop Roche among them, that this is a new church and it is a new faith.
Oh yeah, they believe that. I know. They do believe it. I've heard it many times from them. They believe that the church renewed, started again, was reset at the Second Vatican Council. They absolutely believe that.
And yet, as we've said, ad orientem, no evidence of it in antiquity. Versus populum, facing the people. No, doesn't come from antiquity. Concelebration doesn't come from antiquity. And it's surely not difficult for people to, who listening to what we were talking about earlier, for them to realize, you see, there is a difference, a huge difference. It's not just ascetical. We're not just saying, it's just as nice facing the people as it is not facing the people. That's not the argument. That's not the argument. The point is that this is a clear rupture, a clear break with perennial tradition, and not just tradition, but doctrine. It's the very understanding of what the Mass is that is at stake.
I mean, it's as simple. I think we've mentioned it several times before in this program. But it's the clear choice of do you put God at the center of Eucharistic worship, or do you put man at the center, where you have the priest presiding and the people surrounding? It becomes inward looking and centered on humankind, with everyone, priest and people, facing towards the east, from whence Christ will come, towards God, harmoniously, with the priest leading his people towards, all facing the same direction, worshiping the same God. I mean, it's as clear as the light of day what the emphasis is. So the rupture is that the earthly worship is no longer centered on God, but it's centered on the congregation. There's this nonsense too that you cannot have the celebration of the Eucharist without a congregation. It's the congregation that confects the Eucharist. I mean, we've heard all this nonsense for years now. Why? Because it's centered on man.
Well,
And
said
that's,
not a meal.
well, yes, but
Yeah.
So it's either looking towards God in hope of redemption, or it's looking inwardly towards man. And I mean, it's not just the church. Since the Enlightenment, so-called, Western culture has been doing the same. It's been putting man at the center of its universe. And as we see it play out, I mean, it's man chooses who lives and dies. Look at the abortion question. Natural law is subservient to human law. Now mankind has become the creator. We are now, playing with gene modification, mention of zygotes, artificial intelligence. Man is replacing God as creator. And this is all leading in one clear direction, which is the antithesis of the divine economy, what God's plan is for us. And remember the Abrahamic covenant. I will be your God and you will be my people. That God is the center of creation, the author of creation. God is the center of the universe. All our acts and our very purpose is oriented towards God. So, but we've lost that culturally, and certainly culturally, and in practice within many areas in the modern church life.
Well, and ethically
until
as well,
we
isn't
turn
it?
that around. Oh, of course, ethically, yes. And that's
Morality is
just going to get
determined by how many people prefer something.
exactly, yeah, exactly. And we've lost the concept too. Of course, it's how many people now prefer it. There's no sense of continuity, which we used to have in the concept of the church. That the sensus fidelium. You can't just take a poll among the living. You have to poll the church suffering and the church glorious, as well as church militant, and because they're
Right.
all living members of the church.
And that's the whole.
Um,
That's why this synod and synodality is such a
well,
event.
it's nonsense. I mean, Christianity is not a democracy. It never was. It was never founded as a democracy. Yet, since the so-called Enlightenment, democracy, which is just another form of government that happens to be in vogue at the present time, is the be-all and end-all. It's the measuring stick that everyone must have a vote. And it's not that long ago where not everybody had the vote. Women's suffrages, people had to own property to have a vote, all sorts of stipulations. But there's this perception that, one person, one vote. That's a relatively new concept. And it's certainly not what God envisaged for his church. He is the Father, Christ is the King. It's hierarchical. It's patriarchal.
It's a theocracy, yeah.
All of these things will get you put up against the wall.
But also,
Um,
it's a divinely revealed faith. That's the
yes, it
point.
is. Of
It's
course, it is.
God in Christ has revealed what the faith
Yeah,
is. It's only for us to accept it and believe it. It is
yes,
not for us to quibble with it and say, "Oh, well, I like this bit and I like that bit, but I don't like this and I don't like that, and I wouldn't believe in that in a bunch of Sundays." It's you
yeah.
know,
I know. When you think of it, you know, the audacity of God's people to take revealed revelation and to say, well, we're a little uncomfortable. We're going to have a vote on this. We're going to vote you out on this one, God. Come on.
yeah.
It's just if scales could fall from people's eyes and see how illogical the modern approach is.
Well,
I
and
mean,
have we not seen?
I,
I mean, have we not evidence enough? Look at all the major Protestant sects, for example, who have democratized um, their faith. Um, split after split after split after split. Just look at the Anglican Communion, which is, arguably the nearest largest counterpart. It's torn apart by this
yeah,
notion that faith can be decided by majority votes. That theology,
yeah,
that it's crazy, absolutely crazy. Um, and in stark contrast to the problems, for example, amongst the Orthodox, um, where for all their arguments, they are arguing over divinely revealed truths, um, and generally their spats are about ecclesiological discipline.
yeah,
Um, but they believe, they they're not they're not schisming over dogma or doctrine. Um, they schism over um, ecclesiology.
yeah. Jurisdictional questions, etc., etc. Yeah, it's um, no, you know, I wish people would just sit back and just scratch their head a minute, make a diagram if necessary, and see how this is panning out. And I don't think it would take somebody more than half a dozen moves to get to the truth of the matter, to see the fallacy of what's presented, and it's presented as truth.
Mm.
A democratized church.
But
That's where the
subjective
synod,
truth.
subject. Of course, it's subjective, um, which is just the antithesis of revealed truth.
Yeah.
Um, and it's I don't know how we've ended up buying into this, where for millennia the fathers and the doctors of the church have warned us against it, um, and preached the objective truth. In fact, you don't even Christians before Christ, stumbled upon this truth. Um, I'm talking about Greek philosophy, etc. Um,
Mm.
it's but yet we've succumbed to this malaise that we just nod and accept, and it again, it's because it feels good. I feel as if I have my say and
Mm.
I'm being listened to. Unless you can
Uh,
present a logical argument, I don't particularly want to listen to you. I mean, I'll
well,
do
it's
you the
vanity.
respect of
It's
hearing it,
vanity.
uh,
It's vanity. It all
but
comes down to the devil's
it's
favorite
vanity.
sin, pride.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as I've said many times before, um, whereas the human race is putting itself in the role of the creator,
Mm.
which belongs to God alone. It is exactly the same sin of Lucifer, who would have put himself in the place of God. And we're
Exactly.
skirting very, very close to that. Very close to that. And as we sinned corporately before through the sin of Adam and Eve, who's to say we can't sin corporately again if we push it that far?
Yeah.
I don't know. I put that out as a question. Um, so we're in a very precarious situation, and we need to turn it around, for the sake of souls, for the sake of the future of the human race. And any other major world faith, do you see them democratizing it? Do you see the mullahs in the Middle East taking a straw poll of the faithful, to see which direction they should move? And no, it's ridiculous. But we in the West have just gone nuts for it, and we see it as the future. It's not. It's chaos. It's absolute
Of course,
chaos.
coming up soon, and I suppose then we will find out. But one of the answers in the Responsa Ad Dubia was to reiterate that ordinations are no longer to be administered in the traditional rite, and the old pontifical is not to be used. Well, it's coming soon, next month, after next month in March, to Lent, and of course Embertide ordinations, traditional times of ordination within the Ecclesia Dei communities. And it'll be interesting to know, I suppose we'll find the answer out, whether those ordinands from the FSSP and the Institute of Christ the King, etc., whether they will be ordained with the new rite or the old.
Yeah. Well, I'm sort of, while I'm sympathetic to it, to their predicament, and I can see the disappointment that it would cause. I have to wonder about, actually what really does it mean, because the bishop who will be ordaining in either rite has been ordained rather than consecrated in the new rite.
Yeah.
So where is the continuity?
Yeah. Well, this was ever the question that traditionalists have had about the Ecclesia Dei ordinations anyway, because bless him, Cardinal Burke for sure. He celebrates the traditional liturgy beautifully. He looks the part. He dresses the part. He speaks the part. But he was ordained, not consecrated a bishop. What does it mean then for these Ecclesia Dei ordinands to be? I mean, in one sense, it's kind of, why does it matter if as they say they accept Vatican II, if as they say they have no problem with the new Mass, if as they say they have no problem with the new rites and liturgies of the Novus Ordo, then actually, why does it matter to them whether or not they're ordained in the traditional rite or the new rite? I mean, this is that oil and water question again that Traditionis Custodes has thrown up, because why does it matter? Now, their supporters and various of them, of course, themselves and others, will be scandalized, will be disappointed, will be shocked if these Ecclesia Dei priests are ordained with the Novus Ordo rite. But then we have to ask, well, why? Why are you so dismayed if you believe anyway that everything else in the Novus Ordo is perfectly fine and valid? Why would you worry about it?
Yeah.
And I think this is the question that people like Taylor Marshall et al. Have yet to talk about, have yet to consider. I don't think they've realized. But if if I can just imagine, the people at Restoring the Faith and the Meaning of Catholic and Taylor Marshall and all the others, I can just imagine they'll be in uproar if this ember tide, Rome says to the FSSP, etc., you must only use the Novus Ordo rite of ordination, there'll be an uproar. But the question has to be back to them, well, why? Why the uproar?
Yeah, no, it's as you said, it's been ever the question, and I mean it goes back to the bishop. I mean, if you have to sign up to say that everything is valid and everything is good about the new rites, that you just simply prefer the old rite, but then you should have logically no problem. It wouldn't matter really what rite you're ordained in. And if it does matter, the ordaining bishop was ordained according to the new rite. So if it did matter, it would still be a problem. So, it's, I can understand as well that it's symbolic, and some priests will argue, that while we recognize the new rite, what's contained in the old rite is the power of the keys at the end of the ordination ceremony. The chasuble is let down when the rites of them to forgive sins, which is absent in the new rite. And in fact, you have to wait for a couple of weeks until you get a letter in the mail, and that suffices. So some people argue that, and of course that is symbolic and it's an integral part of the rite, which is missing in the new. But beyond that, any sort of serious investigation would have you question the origins of the whole thing. As you rightly pointed out, if you accept the new rite and everything that goes with it, then you shouldn't have a problem being ordained in it. If you do have a problem with it, then you should ask the question, well, the ordaining bishop in the old rite, how did he receive his orders? Well, then you'll find a problem there. So, yeah, I mean, it's inconsistent. Either these people haven't thought about it, or they have, but they're just not brave enough to come out and say it.
Well, of
Because
course,
that would be a fundamental question.
what some of them
Questioning
will say is that the older rite perhaps is they would argue is not necessarily that it's more valid, but that it confers more graces because there are more blessings and so on and so forth in the older rites, which is true to a point. But again, another brilliant article appeared this week by Dr. Peter Kwasnowski, and he was reminding people that they need to ensure that the older rite of blessing of holy water is used rather than the new rite, because there is a significant theological difference, a difference in doctrinal understanding of what's going on with the rite. Because with the new rite, a blessing of holy water, for example, no exorcisms are said over the salt and the water, etc. Now, some people would say, "Oh, well, what's all that about?" Well, the point is, of course, that anything that is not everything has been touched by evil. Everything has been touched by sin. We don't live in the Garden of Eden. We live in a corruption of creation, and the devil in a fallen world, and everything is tainted. And so in the traditional rite and the traditional way of thinking, because it's not just about holy water, but various other blessings of things as well, stuff is exorcised before it is then sanctified. So that in the older traditional rite of blessing of holy water, the salt and the water are both separately exorcised and then hallowed and then mixed together and sanctified again together, creating, as it were, almost a new element, by virtue of it becoming holy water. Now, in the new rite of holy water, none of that happens at all. Simply the water, the salt is poured into the water, and the water is blessed, and that's it.
And
Now,
and that's on a good day.
that's not a good
I've
day.
seen
Oh,
many
I mean,
priests just take
just sign
a
the
bucket of
cross.
water and wave their hands over it. Not a
Yeah,
prayer said. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, and so when it comes to, these discussions about old rite, new rite, etc., I think what people need to appreciate is again, these liturgies have different theologies. It's again
Hmm.
not just ascetical, but there is a difference in theology going on. In the old rite, it is recognized that all creation is groaning and moaning, as St. Paul says, for salvation, for the redemption, for the restoration of the new earth with the new heavens, etc. Um, whereas all of that is gone with the new right theology. Um, so when it comes to the when it comes to the blessing of holy water, when it comes to the ordinations of priests, etc., um, these are serious questions
Hmm.
that have to be asked and have to be considered, because there are it's two opposing systems of theology, re-understanding the nature of redemption, and and what needs redeeming, who needs redeeming, and how things are redeemed. um, and this is fundamental Christian theology. um, so aside from the question of whether or not somebody actually believes Vatican II is valid or invalid, or the modern rites are valid or invalid, there's the whole question of the theologies
Hmm.
involved, because these extra blessings and graces, etc., that were performed in the old rites didn't come from nowhere, and they weren't just aesthetic. Um,
Hmm. No, no, no. I mean, I, I think we've said as much. If our viewers have noticed, in different ways, we've said it. It's back to the lex orandi, lex credendi notion that there's a fundamental shift, and you have the hierarchs within the church that will actually say that it was a reset of Christianity. It was a new beginning at Vatican II. Um, and with that, the changes made to the ritual, changes made to the Mass, to the other sacraments, express a new theology, a new way of expressing a new belief. Whereas the older rites and rituals and sacraments, and of course the Mass, is very clear on the theology which it preaches through its prayer. Um, and I mentioned earlier that are we God centered or are we man centered? There's been a rupture, um, uh, both in the church and culturally, and I think, no, I know, um, we have to make a choice. Each individual has to choose. Um, just as your godparents chose Christ for you on your baptism day, um, and that was confirmed, we have to make a stand and make a choice of what we are to believe and what our salvation depends on, and what will allow us to live a purposeful life according to God's will. Um, and for me, the choice is clear. Um, do I go after a novelty, or do I go after what has been taught everywhere and always? And don't let people uh, sort of smoke screen you with calls of fidelity and loyalty, um, as Archbishop Roach tried to do in his broadcast that threatened the traditionalists with schism as
Yeah, the
being the
irony.
authors of schism. I know the absolute irony of it. You know, do you nail your colors to a mast of novelty, or do you nail your colors to the mast of tradition? And I mean that in the proper sense of the word, that which has been handed on unchanged. I know what I'm going to go for. But, you know, we have been given uh, the faculty of reason, the very, the very reason that our souls are immortal is because we are rational beings. God has given us that. God has given us free will to choose. We either choose freedom, which is conforming that choice to the will of God for us, or we go against it. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, corporate sin entered the world. It's a fallen world because of a choice made by our forefather. Are we going to do that again, either personally or collectively? And we have to think long and hard about that, and be certain that we are doing the right thing. But if you really seriously think about it and it won't take you long, if you use the tools of logic, you'll find out what the truth is. One is worth it. The other is dangerous, to be mild about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And answer to a question from Janet. Hopefully this debacle doesn't affect the old Romans. Too right it doesn't. Too right it doesn't. We pointedly have no truck with any of this nonsense whatsoever. And for those who are in England and Wales, where the traditional rite of confirmation will no longer be offered by others, I am available, ready and well, when I'm better, ready and available to administer all the rites and sacraments as they've always been, as are all old Romans. So just check us out on theoldroman.com, and there is going to be posted on there a contact and application form for those who want to receive the traditional rite of confirmation, including a treatise on why receiving it from us is okay to do so. So look out for that. I don't know whether any of you have noticed, but in the last couple of weeks, as promised, it took a little while, and it's still an ongoing effort. But a traditional Latin Mass directory is now available on theoldroman.com. So far for North America, so for the USA and Canada, and for Ireland and the United Kingdom. We need your help, both to notify us of any missing traditional Latin masses that should be included and listed in the directories, but also to confirm whether those that are listed are still extant. I know, for example, but I'm waiting for a reliable source to check the state of the TLMs in Illinois, because there are various rumors, but I need to know whether the listings we've got for Illinois are still pertinent or not. But the same is true of the listings for all over the place. So we've collated the information from the most recent, as far as we can tell, listings of various websites, Una Voce, Traditional Latin Mass Society, etc., the SSPX and others. But again, this information is only useful if it's true and if it's accurate. So please let us know. Just check, run through the listings, or not. Just go to the directory page and type in the details of the Latin Mass you know about, and send it to us, and we will determine. We can check whether it's already listed or not. But do let us know, because as well, if Archbishop Roche is to be believed, then we can see a considerable thinning out of the availability of traditional Latin masses. So it would be good to know where they are. So please do help us out with that. Otherwise, in the news, Peter's pence has dropped by 15%, apparently, for the last year. Can we hope, Bishop Kelly, that people are beginning to realize and perhaps not give as generously or give at all to prop up the corruption and the scandal that is the contemporary church?
I think there's a certain amount of that. I know it has been mentioned here in the States a lot about stop giving to them until corruption is rooted out, and that's not just the sexual scandals, but the very fact that I believe it was Peter's pence money that was used for nefarious real estate transactions in London.
Yeah,
Um,
which
you
Cardinal
know,
Becciu is under trial.
why would you give your money to that? I mean, it's just, and if you have a problem with the hierarchy, the direction they've taken, the decisions they've made, well, jolly well hit them where it hurts. They clearly couldn't care less if you came to mass or not, if you watched it at Zoom or knocked one of their locked doors. They clearly couldn't uh, uh, care less when they give you no moral direction whatsoever. And if you look at their own examples of it, leaves a lot to be wanting. But they do care about the money that you put into the collection, because that keeps them going. That keeps the marble halls swept and the shiny buttons shiny. And that will make it. They will listen to that. They won't listen to the pleas of the likes of Father Buss. They probably won't even listen to the boos and the hackling that Cardinal Cipridge received at the local Chicago March for Life, because they don't care. But what they do care about putting gasoline in their black cars, and being able to continue on with a lifestyle of which they become accustomed. You can see their lack of willingness to rebuke politicians in Washington because they enjoy favor. They get invited to all the nice parties and the receptions, and they're given the impression that they matter and that they're consulted and they have power. I think they're foolish if they think that, because I think as has been seen, these secular senators and congressmen will just walk over them if it suits them. So yeah, I hope it's a direct response. I think it's probably a mixture of just people just leaving the church, and so therefore it's down.
Yeah.
But taking account that it's quite a large percentage actually. 15% in 1 year is rather large, that I think people are withholding. And I encourage it if that's how you feel. I mean, I wouldn't give my money to Planned Parenthood, so called, because I don't agree with what they're doing. I wouldn't give them one cold penny of mine. And if you don't agree with what the hierarchy in the modern church is doing, don't give them one cold penny, because it's not been spent to save souls, as we know. How many souls has a multi-million-pound flat in Chelsea ever brought to Christ? It's if you feel that way, don't. It's your money. You've earned it. There are other ways of giving to charity. There are other ways of giving to Catholic charities that will reach the poor, or whatever the particular charity section is targeting. But your local St. Vincent de Paul, your local Legion of Mary, things that are local and on the ground. They don't have to be sent to a central fund in Rome, and then God knows what happens with it. Even some of the major charities. There was something there, the Trochra campaign, which is the hierarchy's charitable fund in Ireland. Was, they spend more money on staff's wages than ever gets dispersed among charitable recipients. So, your money, you've earned it. You have the right to dispose of it as you see fit. I wouldn't feel guilty for not giving it to them. And if you feel strongly, and in fact, I think you would have a moral imperative not to do it until they get their house in order, until you see fundamental change, reform, and you are confident that the money that you donate is going to a good cause. Then, of course, I would withhold it. Maybe they'll listen then.
Well, indeed. I mean, there's got to be a way, isn't there? Surely of making them listen. And this synodal path thing is not the way. they've already decided. The report, the apostolic exhortation for the end of that synod is already in draft form.
Oh yeah.
Long, probably before even the synod was called, and certainly whatever comes up in the synodal path. There are, of course, those who are saying, oh, well, shouldn't traditional Catholics take part in the survey just so that, well, you could. But I can tell you now, it won't make a jot of difference. It won't make it.
If you look at the last survey that was taken among the bishops regarding the traditional Latin Mass.
So-called, yeah.
So-called, yes. I mean, the conclusion was in way before those anyone ever licked a stamp on those letters sent to the bishop. If you believe this, I mean, it's a smokescreen. It's and it'll lead to no good. And give locally. Give, there are many charities locally where you can actually see your money at work, and you can go and volunteer and watch your money work. Yeah, and give to tradition. Support traditional priests. Support priests who have to perhaps work a secular job. Support priests who have to travel hundreds of miles to get from one mass center to the next, to buy wine and wafers for the celebration of Mass, liturgical books, the building funds for traditional chapels. All of those things are worthy causes, and you can see it actually happening. You can see, well,
that's the beauty of it, isn't it? Yeah. That when you give to a traditional chapel, that the faith and the rites are going to be offered.
Yeah. And you will enjoy the prayers of a grateful priest and congregation, guaranteed. I mean, the congregations and priests and bishops pray for their benefactors all the time, so you will enjoy the grace of what your labor has through your charity is achieving. So yeah, absolutely. These things are important, and your money is going towards missionary work, because these men that travel between different mass centers, who work tirelessly for little reward, are bringing souls to Christ, or Christ to souls, to be more accurate about it. But they're there preaching. They are not afraid to evangelize. They're not afraid to go forth baptizing all nations to the ends of the earth, to preach this good news, the message of salvation. So yes, that is money well donated, and you can watch it in action.
Now, a final question from a viewer. I think it's a good question. I see a high correlation between trans and hyper-Americanism, with various forms of dogmatizing all sorts of stances, e.g., guns, Trump, vaccines, or lack thereof. Do we do ourselves a disservice with this? No, you're in America. So I'll let you go first.
You should ask an American. Yes, there is. I mean, I can see that now. I think they're not the vast majority, but they're a loud minority that do, because they see tradition and conservatism. They don't necessarily have to go hand in hand, but they often do. They, I can't explain. Well, okay, things like guns and vaccines. Yeah, just as they perceive in the church, and we've seen this very recently, that their rights as Catholics are being taken away. Their access to the Mass, the traditional Mass, has been taken away. Their access to Mass at Easter and Christmas has gone, or the first Sunday of the month. Their access to traditional marriage rights, to traditional confirmation, all of these are being stripped away in the name of progress, as Archbishop Roche makes very clear in his broadcast. And they perceive, there's a parallel they perceive in politics where gun rights are being restricted. Now, I don't want to get into the whole thing about guns. I do think there are too many guns in American society. It is in the Constitution that people have a right to bear arms as part of a well-established militia, I think the wording goes. Now, does that mean you have to have military-style assault weapons, or do you have a shotgun to dispatch a pheasant for the table, or to get rid of a fox from worrying your lambs if you're a farmer, or if you live in an urban setting for self-defense. I think that's its own debate, but I can see the parallel why people of a conservative nature and a traditional nature would make a connection, because they see their rights being stripped away. As regards vaccines, this sort of state imposition of vaccines, states should encourage. I don't think they mandate any other vaccine. I don't think you're mandated to get MMR. I don't think you're mandated to get polio. But they seem to want to mandate this particular vaccine. Now, I'm not anti-vaccine. I would encourage people, to research the particular vaccine, to look at the moral consequences of it, and for their own health and the health of others, to reach a decision on that. But do I think the state should impose that? I have a difficulty with that, because where is your freedom to choice? I mean, the state upholds the freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body, but not when it comes to vaccines. It's not consistent. Trump, I don't know. I think a lot of traditional Catholics may have voted for Trump on one item alone, which is his stance on abortion, as opposed to Hillary Clinton, who was radical, who was up until birth, and perhaps even partial birth, that had been discussed in her circles in the Democratic Party. So I could see the link there. If you're forced to pick one or the other, you go one that is more in line with your faith and moral system. Does it damage? I think it can. Like anything, when you become fanatical about something, and you're not equipped to explain why you hold such positions, then you could be seen as a sort of bit of a maverick, and it can come across. Um, and also, I would just flag or highlight the point that, you know, a lot of accusations are made by the liberal media, name calling, stereotyping, that may not actually exist on the part of the individual or groups of individuals that hold particular conservative or traditional ideas, but that are imposed upon them by a narrative that that has been conjured up by media, by the opposition, to paint them as such. So I would, that also plays a factor. Are any one of these factors to the fore of the other? No, I think it's a combination of it. And I think the system, the Constitution of America regarding guns, the prevalence of individual freedom as regards vaccines, and the polarization that has happened relatively recently within the American political system is sort of the perfect storm that would lead to a question like this. And I can see why people would look at conservative and traditional Americans and sort of and see that extreme. But it's not as black and white as you would think. I mean, it's more nuanced than that. That there are various factors feeding in, including, as I said, from the opposition, of wanting to paint them as these sort of backward, hickabilly, redneck, sort of ill-educated, not part of the East Coast elite. And that suits their narrative to paint them with that, and gives them their sense of superiority. I think a lot of Catholics, especially Catholics, who you probably don't find in more fundamental branches of Christianity, but especially traditional Catholics, are very aware of the mandate to think and to pray and to act. That you just don't blindly follow, that you do engage your reason. At least I hope that would be the case, because you can't get more traditional than that. So I don't know if that answers your question. Hopefully it shines a little bit of light from what I observe as as somebody who did not grow up here. I've lived here now, it'll be 20 years this year. So this is the observation of a relative outsider, having been here for 20 years. But I think it's more nuanced than it would seem, or others would have you believe.
Yeah, I think we always and because this sort of correlation between traditional social and political values and stances with a traditional perspective on the faith go hand in hand all over the world. The same is true in France, the integrists, etc. The same in Austria, etc. So there is, I think, sometimes a natural affinity in the principles involved. For example, you touched on freedom, and it seems to me that the excuse me, that the whole question of guns and vaccines and abortion is all about freedom to defend oneself, freedom to have control over one's body, freedom to accept or reject medical intervention, etc. But I think there is a danger sometimes where the political element perhaps can do a disservice to the faith, where the politics is more emphasized than the doctrine or the theology. So I think I'm conscious too of the fact that in canon law, traditionally clerics, for example, are forbidden to exercise public office. We're forbidden to stand for election. We're forbidden to hold political offices, etc. And part of the real reason for that was so that there not be a confusion between church and state, and the roles and obligations and duties of a cleric obviously is towards the church first. But also too, I think there is something about what Pope John Paul II reflected upon, that priests, particularly parish priests, are called to be bridges, and shouldn't be engaged or identified with things that perhaps will prevent them from being approachable as pastors. And I think there is something to be said for that, whilst at the same time I have a great appreciation for those clergy who do notably make a stand, a political stand on some things. There is, as you were saying, Excellency, there are nuances involved. Of course there are. But I think always we should be careful to present the truth with charity. And there are certainly political truths that are conservative. And when I think it does a disservice to traditional Catholicism is when there is a perception that to be traditional or conservative is to be without compassion, or to be uncharitable. And I think there is, reading as I do, scanning a wide variety of social media channels and platforms. I have to say, sometimes, even though I may agree with the particular stance, politically or theologically, that someone is making, they don't always necessarily make it in the best way. That is to say, in a way that is probably unpersuasive, that isn't going to enable somebody to change their mind, a way that is perhaps not informative, that doesn't invite somebody to think, but just shuts them down. But that speaks, I think, generally to our behavior as Christians anyway. Everywhere and at all times and in all places, we are called to manifest the love of God first and foremost. And that means, in fulfillment of the first commandment, in loving God, to have a care and a love for our neighbor, for his creation, recognizing that each other are all beloved by God. We're not all children of God. Remember, theologically, if somebody has not been baptized, they are not technically a child of God. But all humanity, all human beings, were created to love God and to know God's love for them. And at the end of the day, as Christians, it is our duty. We have a solemn duty, an obligation, primarily to make known God's love and bring others to a knowledge and an acceptance of that love. Therefore, in our discourse with others, we should always exercise prudence and charity. And I think, whether whether certain political stances or ideologies are right or wrong, and whether they conform or not to the traditional faith, I think there is always a necessity for us as traditional Catholics to monitor and check ourselves and ensure that we are not ourselves preventing somebody from coming to faith in Jesus Christ. Because at the end of the day, we are charged by him, each and every one of us, to be a means by which his gospel of good news and redemption is made known. So I know it's very easy, it's very tempting, I'm as guilty of it as the next person. It's very easy to just slam somebody down in a debate online. It's easy because generally we don't know who the stranger is, we don't know who that individual is, we have no relationship with them otherwise, we couldn't really care less, etc. But if we are to be truly Christian, then actually we are called to love as Jesus loves. Remember in St. John, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, and God loves everyone. So I would just bear that in mind.
Yeah, and a good rule of thumb is that our faith, our religion, should influence our politics. Our politics should never influence our faith.
Absolutely.
And that's where you get into trouble. That's where you get, certain Catholics that have to twist themselves into a pretzel to their politics are influencing their faith, and it's leading them from their faith, from the truth of the faith.
Yeah.
But as Archbishop said, do it all in charity. You'll catch more flies with honey than with vinegar.
Exactly. And today is the feast of St. Francis de Sales. And just to say, read some comments in the chat there. I'm not an obfuscator of truth, and that's not what I'm advocating at all. But you can speak the truth pointedly, with compassion. You can even speak the truth frankly, with compassion. What I'm saying is there is no need to descend into what so many do, ad hominem and polemic, negative polemic, etc. It is never right, actually, to call out somebody's mother or their parental status in life, or any other kind of insult. That is just not necessary, and actually doesn't serve the truth. Because if what you say will just shut somebody off from hearing the truth, then you haven't spoken the truth with love. You haven't spoken the truth at all to them. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. I'm not saying that we should sugarcoat the truth or we should avoid speaking the objective truth. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we should be careful how we do it. Because wouldn't it be an awful thing if, when you come to your particular judgment, that Christ turns round and says to you, well, what about that time when? And of course, the danger with social media so often is that, exactly because we don't know who we're talking to, we forget that they are real people. We forget that they may, that they have lives, that they have emotions, that they have, who knows? If you speak to someone too harshly, even with the truth, but if you speak to them too harshly and too derogatively and too insultingly, and you may crush that person's spirit such that they may perform the most heinous of sins and blasphemies against the Holy Spirit. And do you want that on your conscience when you come before the particular judgment? Do you want Christ to turn around and say to you, actually, because of the way you were in that conversation online, that person went and killed themselves? or that person went and did this, that, or anything else. That person never came to salvation. Now, bearing in mind, that is what pastors like myself and Bishop Kelly are expecting to face when we come to judgment. But there's nothing to say that all of us there's nothing to say that all of us don't bear some responsibility for our interactions with others, and particularly when our interactions prevent others from coming to faith. So, yeah, I think I think that pretty much answers Tom's question there. I think we have to be careful. We just have to think before we speak, think before we type. And we're all guilty. We can all be guilty of it. I'll put my hand up. I know you can't see it, but I'll put my hand up and say I have been guilty of that in the past. But I have remembered, and I have, remembered in my confession. That is something, when that happens, that really is something one ought to confess, because you do not want that weighing on your soul at the particular judgment.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Well, we've covered quite a lot.
We have.
Today.
If you're still with us at the end of this makeup session for 2 weeks, we have covered a lot of ground. It's good to be back. It is good to be back. So yeah, and the way things are churning out at the minute, we'll never be stuck for a new topic. So we'll see what the weeks ahead bring us. Yeah,
quite absolutely. Well, we do hope, everyone, that was useful, that was interesting, and has given you food for thought or pause for thought. We will be back next week. Hopefully, I will be COVID clear and recovered. Hopefully, Brother Stanislaus's voice will have returned, and hopefully Bishop Kelly will grace us once more with his presence, and also with his blessing, as I hope he will now.
Yes, conscious of next week on February 1st, we have the feast of St. Bridget. A lot of people aren't aware that Ireland has 3 co-patrons, not just one. Of course, there's St. Patrick, but we have St. Bridget and St. Columba, St. Columkill. So as co-patron of Ireland, I ask her intercession for that country as it drifts further and further from the truths that she enjoyed while she was there. And I ask her intercession for each and every one of you, that you will remain true to the faith and true to tradition, and that the wolves of this world will not prevail against you. You will remain members of the flock of which Christ is the good shepherd. The Lord be with you.
And with thy spirit.
May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost be amongst you and remain with you forever. Amen.
Amen. And then just to close things off, and to speak of another Irish saint whose feast is today. Today is the feast of Saint Blythe, patron saint of bacon butties. Known as Blooming Blythe, which means flower, she was a lay sister and catering manager at St. Bridget's Convent in Kildare in 6th century Ireland. Her portion control was exact, but even if it had not been, her cows, after bilking, would miraculously fill up again and provide yet more for the sisters' needs. Her hagiography states that, under the care of St. Blythe, the bread and bacon at St. Bridget's table were better than a banquet elsewhere.
Oh, that's a new one on me. I don't know why there isn't a statue of that lady on every corner of every street. Bacon buddies. For Americans, it's basically a bacon sandwich, and usually served with lashings of butter, bacon, and I like mine with a little HP sauce, brown sauce. There we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So next time you have a bacon sandwich, or if you have a bacon sandwich today, think of St. Blas of Kildare.
There we are.
There we are. Well, as always, it's been a joy and a pleasure. Thank you all for watching. Do visit the oldroman.com, particularly help us out with the traditional Latin Mass directory, and if you can spare a penny or two, and become a patron and support this apostolate as well. And we will see you all next week. So it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him. Bye now.
Goodbye. God bless.